So, when I was near the end of grad school, looking to see where I might end up, before I heard about the Bluff church and everything, the church I grew up in was going through a transition. The pastor I had sat under for about 20 years, his name was Pastor Bruce. He was retiring at the exact same time that I was graduating. And a lot of people were pushing for us to throw our names in the hat and see if I would become the senior pastor of the church there. And probably the biggest advocate for that was my mother-in-law, who was afraid, still to this day, that I'm going to take Jody to Africa. Don't worry, that's not in the cards right now. But that was a big time. We were wrestling, we were praying with this. We were like, oh God, it looks like the timing of this is lining up. The stars are aligned. Is this what you want? Like, I've been gone away in school for a few years. Is this how you've aligned things for me to come back hometown to take over this church? And so I had a meeting with Pastor Bruce, and I was like, Pastor Bruce, this is how it looks, and I'm hearing from people in the church, and they're asking me to throw my name in the hat. How do I handle this? What do you recommend? And the things that Pastor Bruce said in that conversation, I think, changed a little bit of the trajectory of my life in some ways. He said, absolutely not. And he said, here's two reasons why. And the first one is, he's like, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes in the church, and the things that are going on, the changes that need to be made. I know your heart, and I know if you came into this and this is what you had to face starting out in ministry, this is going to kill you. And I'm like, gosh, looking back, he didn't know about 2020 and COVID and all that. But the second reason why I said no, he's like, there are some people who'd be excited, but there are a number of people who no doubt would remember you as the wild and rambunctious kid who was messing up everything and breaking everything. And despite the fact that you have been gone for a few years, you're still going to be treated as who you once were, not who you are now. And I think that's something that all of us in some ways can relate to. Where you know you've grown and you know you've matured, you know you've changed, and yet people still treat you how you used to be. They still see you as a kid. They still treat you as a kid. They don't see you as a grown individual now. They see you because of your past mistakes, the errors you've made in your past, the things that you stepped across a line, you did something that you regret, and that's all that people can see of you. They see how you stuck your foot in your mouth, how you said things in a moment of anger, and you did something, and that's all that they remember. They filter everything through that lens, and you know you've put great effort into changing. You know you've put great effort into moving away from that, and yet they still see you the same way. They still see you as that kid who made the mistake. And that's a hard place to be. Even Jesus had to wrestle with this. You read the Gospels, and everyone in his hometown refused to believe that he was the Messiah. They kept saying, oh, we remember you as this kid. We remember the things that you used to do. There's no way that you are this individual. And maybe for some of you can relate to this, because you deal with this pressure all the time. Maybe it's with the parent who, despite the fact that you have moved out of their house, you have a family of your own, they still come in and they still treat you as if you're a kid growing up in their house. Maybe it's with a boss, an employee, and a coworker. Maybe it's with a friend who they still see you through that filter, and no matter what you do, no matter the fact that you have grown and matured, they still see you in that way. And I'm betting someone's relating to that. And you probably are having the same question that arises when I wrestle with this. The question that we're going to be wrestling with this morning, it goes like this. What do we do when people cannot accept who we are today because of who we were in the past? And if that's you, I have great news. God's word offers a tremendous amount of encouragement and focus and direction for this question. But before we dive into that, it would be incredibly foolish of us to just open up the Bible and dive right in if we have not made sure our hearts are ready to hear from God. So let's be a people right now who would bring all that we're bringing into this room, every argument that we've had this week. Maybe you had a screaming match on the way in. You came to the door, you're smiling, everything's fine, but you know it was not fine a few minutes ago, right? Or maybe you just are bringing something in this room of the stress and anxiety of the week. Maybe you're just like, I recognize the enemy has been throwing his fiery darts at me this week, and I'm bringing that into this moment. So let's take a moment to pause, take a deep breath, and bring all of our heart back to God so that our heart might be aligned with him again. And we do that in prayer. If you would join me, let's be a community right now that brings all things back to Jesus. Bow your hearts with me. Jesus, we want you right now. And we want to see you in this moment, in this text. And we want to see what you have for us. And we're all bringing something in this moment. We're bringing frustrations, and we're bringing envy, and we're bringing jealousy, and we're bringing anxiety, and we're bringing depression, we're bringing hurts, we're bringing pains, we're bringing our pride, we're bringing our ego into this moment. And we just want to pause and say that we give you everything and everyone on our heart right now. And please, at this time, as we trust these things to you, would you please speak something into our hearts? And would you please mold and shape us from this experience so that we look a little bit more like you and we know you a little bit more intimately, and we are ready to walk into this week with whatever you have ahead of us, and we're ready to do it with you by our side. It's in your name I pray. Amen. This morning, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37. We were in Genesis chapter 37 last week when we looked at the rise of a guy named Joseph. And we went all the way to the point where he became the head honcho over Egypt. Not Pharaoh, but like the prime minister. Well, we're going to go back to chapter 37 because we're going to pick up looking at a guy named Judah and what the story of Judah was. Now, if you have not been following along with this series, we are in a series looking at some of the highlights of the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, first book of the Bible, it's a big deal, right? It kind of sets the stage for the story. There's a lot of things in the book of Genesis. We haven't touched everything. Genesis is a wild ride. You should really go and read the whole thing if you haven't read it, all right? But Genesis was not written in a vacuum. It was written for a particular audience at a particular time who would have read and understood it in a certain way. Now, here's a very important thing when you're reading the Bible. You have to understand what was the context. Who was the original audience? If you really want to understand what is trying to be communicated. And the original audience are those who were the fresh out of slavery in Egypt. They're in the wilderness. They're trying to figure out who their God is. God has spoken to them, says, you're my children. I've got a great purpose for you. Here's the 10 Commandments. Here's the tabernacle. Here are these laws, what it's going to look like to be my people in a crazy, chaotic world. And they're learning from Genesis who this God is. They're learning his story through them, how their story came about from the family of Abraham and how it led eventually to them. And so today's story is about a guy named Judah. And Judah, when he's first introduced, right, throughout the Bible, Judah's a big name, line of the tribe of Judah. David's from the line of Judah, and so is Jesus. But when Judah is first introduced into the Bible, he's not a good guy. He's a scoundrel. He's a villain. And we're introduced to him when he is beating up his brother Joseph and throwing his brother Joseph into a pit. And he had plans with all the other brothers to kill him. But then Judah's the one who has this bright idea. And you see it in chapter 37, verse 26. It says, Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Right? That seems to be reasonable, but you read this next verse, verse 27, he says, Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. All right, so the first words of the Bible of a character when they're shown on the scene, right? We've looked at this previously with Abraham. The first words are very important to help us understand a little bit of the heart of the individual. And here's Judah. His first words are him speaking, I've got this great idea. Let's sell our brother as a slave. Now, some of you maybe have had siblings, and maybe you've joked and wanted to do that to your sibling. Judah actually does, right? He sells his brother Joseph into slavery because he's jealous of his younger brother Joseph and the popularity he was getting from their father. And so they beat him up, and Judah has this brilliant idea to sell him. Now, some people have argued that this was Judah trying to protect his brother, but the text does not say. All right, so we have to go just purely on the text. And based on what we see of Judah in the next chapter, this would tell us, yeah, this is probably not a good motivation of trying to save Judah's life. He just really didn't, or Joseph's life, he just was trying to get something out of it for himself. He's like, well, we could kill him, or we can make some money off of him, right? But you see this kind of character continued on in the next chapter. So the chapter 38 does not talk about Joseph, it's all about Judah. And it's a very graphic story in some ways, but let me talk about some of the details. So it starts off like this. Chapter 38, verse 2, it says, Judah, he goes on this business trip, and there he meets a pretty girl, and we see this in chapter 38, verse 2. It says, there Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. Right? That word took, if you've been paying attention throughout the series, is a very important word in the book of Genesis. Right? It's the word that was used of how Eve took the fruit and then how Cain took Abel's life. And we've seen this over and over again. This is a very important word. It goes back to this idea of the great taking of how humanity constantly messes up. They look at things and they're like, I want this, and I'm going to take it for myself by any means necessary. Right? And it always causes mess. And so here is Judah, of the family that God's wanting to use, and now he's just looks at a pretty girl and he's like, I'm going to take her for myself. Right? Total messed up. Well, the chapter continues, and he has a bunch of sons, and they've passed away, and he's not stepping up as a man to help take care of his daughter-in-law. He's like, oh, you're on your own. Well, then one day he goes on another business trip, and he runs into his daughter-in-law, and he doesn't recognize her because how she's dressed, and we're told this in verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute. This is his daughter-in-law, for she had covered her face. And he turned to her at the roadside and said, and remember, this is the family of God, right? He said this, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Like, you might be thinking, man, my family is messed up, but it is not this messed up, right? Where here is this man who is treating his daughter-in-law like a prostitute, and it causes a whole lot of mess, and it's crazy. But what we're introduced to is a guy who is not a good guy. He's probably in his late 20s, early 30s, in that range of age, and he's just the kind of guy who takes whatever he wants. He does not care about the fact that he just sold his brother into slavery. He cheats on his wife all the time. He does whatever he wants. This is not a good guy when we're first introduced to him. But the next time we're introduced to Judah, it's about 20 years later. And he's a guy who's grown, and he's matured a little bit. He has seen some things. And he started to step up as the leader of the family because Jacob's not really a leader Jacob is father. And neither are the rest of the brothers. And Judah has kind of stepped up in a lot of ways. All right, he's grown. He's been taking on responsibilities of the family. He's helping people. But then a famine comes in the area. Now, famines are not really a big deal for us in the 21st century. We're like, oh man, so eggs are more expensive at the grocery store. Like, that's where we start to feel it. But in that time and age, a famine was a big deal. Like, you needed to eat. You needed crops. And, well, they don't have anything. But you know who does? Egypt. And they have supplies. Judah doesn't know this yet, but they have supplies because Joseph is there and has been put there by God to help prepare the world for this situation, right? So Joseph, he was used by God, put in this wonderful situation despite all of his sufferings where he was able to save lives, right? And so Judah doesn't know his brother is the prime minister, but he knows, man, there is food over there in Egypt and we need to go and get some, right? And so they have this plan. They're like, let's go and let's get this food from Egypt. But when they go, they run into Joseph. They don't know that it's Joseph. Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers, and he starts treating them very harshly. He's like, you're spies, you're villains. You've come here to steal. You come here to cause problems. You can't be trusted in any ways. And so they're mistreated, Judah and his brothers, by their brother Joseph, who they thought is long dead by this point. And Joseph he's kind of like a villain in this story. He's being cruel to his brothers. And it causes this reaction out of Judah and his brothers. They say this in chapter 42. In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, referring to Joseph and what they did, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. This is why this distress has come upon us. Now understand, this has been 20 years, and they have not lived a day without being reminded of their greatest regret of what they did to their brother in a really bad time. And it has haunted them. And so now they're in a bad situation, and their first thought is, God is punishing us because of what we did 20 years ago. We have lived with this. We have not been able to forgive ourselves of this. We've not been able to let this go. This is always before us. Our dad always reminds us of this all the time. And now God is punishing us finally for what we did. That's their mindset. You can see these are guys who are no longer of the sort of men, we're better than Joseph, and we are being prideful of our Joseph, and we can take what we want from our brother Joseph. This is a group of brothers, Judah especially, who have been molded and softened by their regrets. You can see that this is the beginning of the sign of these are guys that are a little bit different. They want to do things a little bit differently than what they have before. And so they have this great amount of stress, and they plead before Joseph, and they're like, we are not dishonest people. Yes, we've made mistakes, but we are trying our best. And look, what we came here honestly seeking help, and they let it slip that they have another brother named Benjamin back home. Now, Benjamin became the new favorite son after Joseph was gone. Jacob apparently still did not learn his lesson. He still picks favorites, and he treated Benjamin as a favorite. And so while he sent all the other brothers off to Egypt, he keeps Benjamin home. Well, Joseph hears about it. As they're talking, they still don't know this is Joseph before them, and Joseph tells them this. He gives them this test. Verse 33 of chapter 42. By this I shall know that you are honest men. He's like, if you really say you are changed men, that you're better men, here's how I'm going to know. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way, and bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men, and I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. So there's like, hey, you know what? You want to prove that you are different? Well, fine. Put one of you, just pick randomly one of you brothers to be in prison. And if you want that brother to be out of prison, well, you got to come and show me that you've got a little brother named Benjamin at home. It's a total test. And it seems like a test of replaying of what happened to Joseph. Will these brothers, sacrifice another brother to protect themselves, to better themselves? Will they cut someone else off at the knees to rise up above someone else? Because that's what they did long ago. So now this question is, will they do it again? Will they return home and Judah and his brothers try to make a case to their father Jacob and say, hey, we've got one of our brothers, he's off in prison, and we couldn't come home with him. If we want to be able to have the food that we need and the resources to survive, then you've got to trust us with little Benjamin to come with us so that we can prove that we are different men, so that we can prove that we are better men than what we were, so that we can prove that we are honest men. And Jacob says no. Like Jacob, he is so wrapped up in one son being a favorite that he is all right with another son suffering prison rather than prove that his other sons are men of integrity now. Like he's totally messed up. Jacob never really changes, right? He's an old crotchety man from his youth to his death, right? But here, you get Judah start to speak up. And Judah says this. Remember, this is the guy who sold his brother once long ago. Here's what he says now in this situation. Verse 8 in chapter 43. He says, send the boy with me, and we will rise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our own little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Notice this is a different man than long ago. And he's putting his word, his reputation, his identity at stake. He's like, man, Dad, you won't trust us, and I get it because of what has happened long ago, but I'm pledging now. It's been 20 years. I'm giving you my word. And if something ever happens to this guy, this brother of ours, Benjamin, then let me pay the price of that. Now, this is a big step. He's putting words out there saying, I'm a different person, and he's willing to do actions. But here's the reality. We always say that actions speak louder than words, and if you really change, then your actions will show it, and you can do that. But here's the real test. When pressure comes, when a crisis happens, when things don't go your way. That's the real test to see if you've changed. Because you can say you change and do some new habits and new actions, but when the pressure comes, then it's going to be tested of, do you maintain that course? Or do you revert back to who you once were? And what we're going to see in the rest of the story is the pressure start to build. And so the brothers go back to Joseph. And they have this presenting of Benjamin, saying, see, look who it is. And they get their other brother back from prison. And it seems like, yeah, this is great. And they have this meal with Joseph, and they're starting to understand a little bit more of his character. And then they go home, and they've got bags full of all of the food that they need to survive, but Joseph plays a trick on them. Joseph takes some of the treasure of his own house and he puts it in the bags of their food. And so along the road, when they're on the way home, Joseph then's like, okay, I'm going to send the guards. These brothers, these guys, they have robbed me. It's total like corruption of power. Yes, I admit, right? Where here's this person, he wants to frame these other people who are innocent, and it's messed up. But that's Joseph in the situation. He's kind of the villain. He's testing his brothers. And so they come, the guards come, they start to arrest them, and here's what the brothers say in the situation. Verse 9 of chapter 44, when they're being harassed by the authorities, and they're like, you stolen from this guy, he was good to you, he believed that you're honest men, but look, you're thieves. And here's what they say. Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants. So like that's a big statement. They're like, man, if we are men of integrity, we did not do this, but if one of us did, they're dead. Let's kill them off, and the rest of us, yeah, we'll be the servants. Now, do you ever find yourself in a moment of heated anger saying something and you find you later regret it? That's kind of the situation here. Because they don't know that Joseph has already framed them, and so their bags are ripped open, and lo and behold, there's the treasure, and it's in Benjamin's bag. Now, here's a test, okay? They could have been like, well, Benjamin, you're on your own, right? Like, you should have listened to us. You should not have stolen. You're on your own, Benjamin. And here's an opportunity for them to maybe rise up a little bit. They did this once before with Joseph. Now here's another opportunity. Are they going to stick to their word? Are they going to be better men, or are they going to go back to who they once were when now there is a real threat on the table? Someone could die. Someone could be in prison. This is not going to look good. Well, here's what we find happens. Chapter 44, verse 13, says, then they tore their clothes. Have you ever been so mad that you just had to rip something, right? Like, and so distraught? That's how they are. Then they tore their clothes, and every man, all the brothers, loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. And when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell before him to the ground. Notice, they didn't get in his face and start screaming and shouting. That they fall on their feet. And here's what they say. Verse 16, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Now, stop right there. This is important. They're not pointing excuses. They're not trying to argue the case. They're not like, hey, we don't know what happened here. We were innocent. They don't do that. They don't be like, you know, we're all here, but it was really him, so the rest of us should be spared. They don't do that like everyone else always does. Instead, they're stopped and they're like, we're not giving excuses. We are clearly in the wrong here. Most people don't do that. They do. And they say, behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found. They're like, you know what? We're all going to be your servants. It may have been this one who messed up, but we'll all give ourselves to you. Well, that's not the end. Joseph continues playing his little games like, no, not all of you, just that one, just Benjamin. And then we see this. Here's where verse 17, where Joseph said this. He said, far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace for your father. Now, this is interesting, right? They could have gone back home. And they could have been like, hey, Dad, this thing happened. Benjamin, he apparently took something from this guy who was a really important dude over there, and he took something from his home, and now Benjamin's in trouble. We did everything we could to help him. We argued. We offered ourselves instead. We said we would all come in, but he's like, no, I just want Benjamin. And so, Dad, we came back home. We gave it our best shot. We gave it everything we could. And you know what? They would not be blamed for that. Because there is sometimes a point where you can do as much as you can to change things, and you hit your wall, you hit your limit. And that's what's being presented. They could go home scotch-free, no problems whatsoever. They gave it their best shot. Yes, they were showing that they were a little bit different than they were before. They didn't take these moments to better themselves, but now, you know what? They've done everything they could. They could just go home. No problems whatsoever. Let someone else suffer for their crimes. But that's not what Judah does. Here's what Judah does. Judah says this to Joseph. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. This is worth noting. Judah in his youth was wild and rambunctious, took whatever he wanted from others to better himself, to raise himself up, to please himself, to prove himself, to validate himself, to get what he could to try to get the Father's approval. That was his old self. And it led to throwing one brother who was innocent into prison. It led to him, sleeping around, messing, all sorts of stuff there. But this Judah right here, 20 years later, a man who has been shaped by his regrets, has been shaped by his willingness to say, I don't want to be that person anymore, is now offering his life in exchange for his brother. He says, man, I will step forward and I will offer myself here and I will walk this road and I will be your slave. Let the boy go. And it is that change when he was pressured to go back to who he once was. And he had given words, and he had given promises, and he had done some actions, but when that pressure was fully on the table, he was committed to remaining who he had become, rather than go back to who he once was. And that change is what finally broke Joseph's heart. And Joseph finally reveals who he is and the games he's been playing. And he knows that his brothers, man, they are different now. Not because they've said it, not because they've done some things a little bit differently, but because when pressure came, they stayed the course. And they were willing to offer their life. They were willing to suffer in exchange for someone else to have a little bit better future. That it changed Joseph's heart. And he says these words, but when he has this moment of clarity, recognizing what God has been doing all through his life, through his brother's life, through the situation of the world around them, and he gives this powerful quote. It's in chapter 50. It's actually the big thesis of the book of Genesis. Verse 20 of chapter 50, he says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. As I said, this is actually one of the main themes of the book of Genesis, of how we constantly mess things up around us. If it's our base nature when we listen to ourselves, when we take what we want, when we follow the pattern of the world, we're bound to make a mess for ourselves. And yet, the story is how patient God is, and how in our mess, how he brings about good. And how that led to Joseph being where he was so that he could serve and be a blessing towards others. And then here's Judah, who's been changed to a different man. And he has walked a different road. And he's been willing to even lay his life down for the scoundrels around him so that they might be better off. And I think this is partially why when years later Jacob comes into Egypt and they're all living as a happy family and he's on his deathbed, he starts giving these promises and blessings over his children. And he says this one, very important one to Judah. It's in chapter 59. He gives this prophecy over Judah. He says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? And here's the big one, verse 10. The scepter, which is the symbol of kingdom, it's a monarchy. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. He gives this prophecy. He's like, Judah, there is going to be a line of kings that will never end. And that kingdom, they will be king of all things until all people have come to bring everything they have back to the promised king. It's the first promise, or it's one of the first promises of a future Messiah, that there will be a king of the line of Judah. First one was David. We're actually going to have a series on David later on after Easter. And then the next one, the big one, is Jesus of the line of Judah. And we're going to see how he's of the line of Judah later on this summer as well. And it's these big promises that God is making through this individual because they were so committed to the change. Because God had worked in their life. And it was going to carry on to future generations. And so as you look at Judah's story as a whole, beginning from where he was to where he ended up, it speaks a lot of wisdom to us today, for us who feel like, man, I'm trying to do better, I'm trying to show that I'm better, and there's this filter, there's this line that people cannot see me past what I once was or what I once did, and Judah shows us some wisdom on how we can move through that. And I think it's like this. It's that others won't accept our changes unless we're committed to them. Others won't accept our changes unless we're committed to them. You can say all day, I've changed, I'm a better person, I'm not who I once was. Those are words, those are powerful words, those are meaningful words, but they need actions. But you can keep in the actions all day long, but when the pressure builds, when it's long, stressed out days, when there is crisis, well, then there's the real test. Are you going to go back to how you once were? Are you going to go back to the ways of acting and thinking and behaving and treating people that you once did? Or are you going to be committed to who you are now? Think about this for the original audience. The original audience came out of slavery in Egypt. That's all they ever knew. And they're constantly faced with the pressure. After they voice saying, we believe in you, God, we're going to follow you, God, we believe that you are our God and you're going to take care of us, that every time they face pressure, which happens a lot, there's always a test of, are you going to go back to Egypt? Are you going to go back to who you once were? And many times they try to, and it causes a huge mess. And this story, I think, would have been inspiring to them of, you know what? We have a great amount of regrets for our past. And we carry this before us. But we don't have to be who we once were. Oh, we can be something better. We can keep moving towards a healthier way. Think about what this means for us as followers of Jesus when Christ says, man, I've put the old to death, and he's given us new life. What opportunities come our way are always a testing of, man, are we going to go back to who we once were? Are we going to play the same game that we have in the past? Are we going to treat people the way we said we were going to treat them in the past? Or are we going to recognize that Christ has put that to death so we can go forward? Now, maybe for some of you, you're like, man, I'm trying here, and I'm trying to show that I'm better, and yet maybe you have a spouse or a kid or a parent or a friend or a coworker, someone in your life who they cannot seem to accept that. You've been persistent in walking a different way. You've not only said the right things and done the right actions, but you've maintained the course even when you're pressured. And it's hard. I get that. Because you want to be better and you don't want to be who you once were. And you're fighting to maintain that course. I understand fully what that's like. And yet you know they're still treating you how you once were. or the mistakes you made, and they can't forgive you. Well, here's some advice I've learned that helps with this. And that comes out of Judah, right? So the first one is this, right? If you're in this situation, first one, remember what God has done for you and who God says you are now. We got to preach the gospel to ourselves all the time. Because if we're not, we're going to be preaching something terrible to ourselves. But man, the gospel is more than just, hey, how do you get to heaven? That's such a tiny thing. It's about an entirely new identity lived with someone now. The great King of the universe who looks at us and says, you are my beloved son and daughter now, despite what everyone else has said, despite all your mistakes, despite all your flaws, despite all the ways that you stuck your foot in your mouth or you crossed the boundaries, you are a beloved son and daughter of Christ now. Man, that should be the defining characteristic of your heart and soul and life. And it's important that we remember that, because that is always the first thing the enemy tries to attack, is to get us to forget that. So know who God has made you to be. Know what he has done for you. So that's the first one. Here's the second advice. Examine yourself for any bitterness you are harboring and not forgiving. If you want others to forgive you, then you got to start looking. You're like, man, am I holding on to bitterness? Am I not forgiving myself or others for my own immaturity? You know, it's easy. We always like, man, I want other people to forgive me for my own immaturity and my mistakes, but we're not really good at offering it to others when they show immaturity and mistakes. And so if you want to be the person who others would recognize, man, there's been a change in you, and you've stayed the course, and you've been committed to being who God has called you to be, then you first got to start and ask, man, is there things I'm not forgiving? If I want to be forgiven, if I want to be seen as changed, if I want to be seen as different, well, am I offering others grace and mercy? Or am I holding on to some bitterness that is shaping how I interact with others and how I'm treating others? Here's the third thing. Understand you can't change how people treat you, but you can change how you treat them. And here's the sad reality. Some people will never be able to treat you differently. They'll never see past the kid you were in your youth, even when you've moved out of the house a long time. They can't see sometimes past your mistake when you didn't know any better, you're foolish, you're immature. But you know you've changed. And you know that they're always going to treat you this way, but that does not mean you have to treat them the same way. You can't change how people treat you. Oh man, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could, right? We can't change how people treat us. But we can make a decision of how we are going to treat others, of what is going to be our identity in this moment. Are we going to revert back to who we once were, or are we going to stay the course? We're going to continue moving to the way that God has for us and who he has called us to be. And here's the fourth one. Obey God's calling. He'll handle the rest. That means we don't have to carry that weight and pressure of trying to change others and their opinions and their ideas. Our call is to stop and say, man, I know what God has called me to. I know who he's called me to be, and I'm going to move that way. And yeah, others might not accept it. Others might not be on board for it. Others might even turn and try to work against this. Oh, but I'm going to stay the course because I know what God has called me to. I know God has called me to this relationship. I know God has called me to this place. I know God has called me to this work. I know God has called me to this mission, and I'm going to stay the course. And I'm going to let him handle the rest because he's much better at handling things than I am. That last one's a big one. It's hard because we're control freaks. We want things to be our own way. We present a certain image for others, and we want others to accept us in a certain way. But Judah in this moment, in this story, man, he stayed the course. He was a scoundrel in the beginning. And yeah, he still makes mistakes in life. But he was committed to not going back to who he once was, even when there was so many opportunities to, even when it would have made his situation easier, it seemed like, if he had just went back the the way he once was. Even it looks like it would have been rewarding for him to go back, because maybe if he went back, he would have been the new favorite. But no, he stayed the course. He decided how he was going to treat his brothers. He knew what God was calling him to. And he stepped up to be that person still, even when pressure mounted. And God offers us the same things. He has said the old is gone. There has been death that has been put to death so that we might walk in a new life with Jesus. So let's be committed to that. I'm going to invite you to bow your hearts and minds in a moment of prayer. And before I pray, let me go ahead and say, maybe someone in this room, maybe you recognize, gosh, I don't even have a relationship with Jesus. My heart is not for him. And this whole, God putting the old to rest and being a new man, like, I want that. I don't want to be who I once was. I don't want to treat people the way I've treated them before. I want to walk differently, and I want to be able to have the strength to maintain this pressure. Maybe that's you, and if so, I want to invite you just in a moment to pray with me and just simply ask God for help. And there's so much that changes when we stop and say, God, I need your help. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, bow your hearts, and let's pray and bring this back to Jesus. Jesus, thank you for always being there. Would you please help us? Would you please help us to stay the course? Would you help us who are young and old to have a vision for who you have called us to be, and give us the resilience to be committed to being who you've called us to be? To not go back to playing the same old rules. To not go back and be the angry, bitter, resentful, jealous, selfish, whatever person we were before. But that we might walk forward, be committed to being people of love, joy, peace, mercy, grace, self-control, all these things that you've called us to be. May this be true not just in our words, but let it be true also in our actions. And not just that, but when there is pressure in our life, when there are people in our life who are calling us back to who we once were, when there's circumstances in our life that tell us, man, if we just acted this way, if we did what we used to, if we played by these old rules, then things would work for us. When those pressures amount, give us that vision once again. Remind us of who you are and what you have done for us, that you are our King who went and died on a cross for us to give us new life, and we want to walk in that. Father, I'm praying for those in this room and watching online who don't have a relationship with you, that this might be the beginning of some changes in their heart, that they would get a glimpse of the person that you have called them to be, and that they would see that invitation that is out before them, and they would trust you with it, that they would say yes and say, man, I want to be committed to this. And I'm praying for those in this room who maybe have felt like they've grown cold and stagnant in their faith. They've just been going through routines. They know all the right answers. They can say all the right things in front of people, but their heart is far from you. I'm praying that this might be an opportunity for them to evaluate themselves and say, maybe I haven't been serious about this. Maybe I've been giving a show to others, but I want to be truly committed to who Christ has called me to be, and the mission that he has for me, and the life he wants me to live, and the person he wants me to be in every circumstance. I want to be that person. I want to be committed to that. And I'm praying that there might be some in this room who have that heart, so that we might come into this Holy Week giving such a testimony to the people around us of what life change you truly bring, Jesus. And as always, when I say these prayers, I often say this, and I mean this with all my heart: Jesus, please let it start with me too. I don't want to pray something that I'm not committed to as well. So right now, as we stand to worship and sing praises to you, may our hearts be in line with you. May we be strengthened and emboldened to be committed to who you've called us to be. And may others in time see that there has been a change that has occurred in our hearts, because in our hearts is Christ now. Is in your name I pray. Amen.